I didn't plan to say anything that day. I walked into that final HR hearing, feeling like a man carrying his own autopsy report, already knowing how it ended. And then my manager's lawyer leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Enjoy your new life. You'll never work in this field again." In that moment, something clicked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, cold feeling as if I had finally stopped being afraid. They thought I came for an execution, but I had only come to put a period at the end. HR sat across from me, hands folded, face expressionless. My manager, Tom, was already savoring his victory, as if this was part of his usual morning routine. Coffee, a quick call, destroy another employee. He didn't look at me directly, only glanced at me like a predator, certain its prey was already dead. The whole room felt heavy with silence, and somewhere behind the wall, a printer was spitting out paper as if narrating the scene. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and realized my breathing was steady. Too steady. It's strange how calm you become once you've already passed the deepest point of fear. When you have nothing left to lose, or when you finally understand that everything they're trying to take from you, you don't need any more. Tom spoke first, automatically, fast, confident, like he was reciting a poem he knew by heart. Failure to meet expectations, repeated undisciplined behavior, consistent missed deadlines. I'd heard it all before, and every word was a lie. He spoke so smoothly, it was obvious he had practiced in the mirror the night before. He probably had. HR nodded along, trying to appear like an impartial party, though we both knew the truth. No one in that building wanted to cross Tom. He was the kind of person they put on problematic projects because he'd do whatever upper management asked. People like him don't get fired. People like him get used. I listened to him list the points of my unsatisfactory conduct, and inside me rose that feeling you might mistake for calm, but is actually exhaustion. This is what the moment looks like when someone stops fighting for a life that stopped being theirs a long time ago. HR asked me to comment. No tension in her voice, no interest, just procedure. Words for the record. I looked at her and suddenly understood. Nothing I said here mattered. Not because I was wrong, but because they had already decided. The decision was made long before I walked in. But that strange calm wouldn't leave me. I said I'd listen to everything until the end. Let them say what they came to say from the very beginning. Let them announce the verdict they had prepared. Let them do it openly. Let them finish the game. My manager smiled like he had just been granted permission. He leaned forward and said, "We're recommending termination, inefficiency, toxic behavior, obstruction of team performance. You know this isn't up for discussion." This is the moment when most people feel something inside them drop. But nothing fell in me. Everything that could break had already broken. The first time I stayed until 3 a.m. fixing his mistakes. When he blamed his failures on me. When HR first said, "We'll handle it internally," and did nothing. Tom's lawyer took over, leaned toward me, and said the line I think he came specifically to deliver. "You'll never work in this field again. Enjoy your new life," said with the tone of a man who believes he's got his hand around your throat. But here's the irony. Sometimes that's the exact moment you realize your throat is no longer in their hands. I just looked at him. Long, calm. He expected an explosion, a breakdown, at least a frustrated sigh. But nothing happened. I only nodded, like someone who finally sees all the cards on the table. While HR typed something into the document, I watched Tom. His smug, relaxed posture. The way he was certain he had won. He truly believed this was the end. He had no idea it was the beginning. Right then I understood one simple thing. They underestimated me. They underestimated my memory, my patience, my ability to wait. They didn't know I had documents, email archives, screenshots, chats, proof. They didn't know I had stopped playing defense long ago. But I said nothing. Not yet. I just sat and listened as they read what they thought was my grave. and I let them believe the funeral had already started. Tom signed the papers. HR nodded at me to do the same. The lawyer folded his arms like he was watching yet another case close in his favor. I picked up the pen, looked at the document, and suddenly felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. Even though the AC was off, it was the beginning of the end, but not mine. And when I signed, I did it slowly, as if I were signing not a sentence, but an invitation to what they called my new stage of life. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to leave quietly, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with something they never even bothered to notice, the truth. And it was the only thing capable of destroying them far more than they ever tried to destroy me. The last seconds of the meeting dragged on. Tom decided to add a final blow. Good luck finding a place that'll still take you. I doubt there are many. I lifted my eyes at him, and for the first time during the whole conversation allowed myself a faint smile. Not a challenge, not anger, just the calm confidence of someone who already knows more than he says. You'll be surprised, I said quietly, and I walked out of that room feeling not defeated, but beginning. But that was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, that part had burned out of me weeks ago, but because for the first time in months, my mind wasn't fogged. It was sharp, awake, almost painfully clear. I kept replaying the hearing in my head. Not the insults, not the threats, but the way Tom looked at me when he thought he'd finally crushed me, like he'd won a game I never agreed to play. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. What I felt was quiet, focused, a slow, steady realization that every boundary I'd tried to protect had been crossed so many times, the lines were barely visible. I'd spent a year letting them draw the narrative. Now it was time to write my own. But to understand what that moment truly meant, you need to know what led to it. Tom wasn't always my manager. I inherited him. When leadership reshuffled departments, he arrived like a storm cloud. The type that doesn't bring rain, just pressure. He didn't yell. He didn't swear. His weapon was precision. A comment slid into a meeting at the perfect moment. A question phrased to sound innocent, but designed to make you stumble. A smile that said he already knew how the story ended. At first, I thought it was just me being sensitive. New manager, new expectations, normal stuff. Then deadlines started shifting, only for me. Everyone submitted tasks on Friday. Mine were suddenly due Wednesday. Everyone else got sprint summaries. Mine conveniently got lost in the shuffle. My project documentation went missing from shared drives. 2 bug reports I'd resolved magically reappeared in the system, labeled as ignored by Ethan. When I confronted him, he'd tilt his head like he was confused. "I'll look into that," he'd say. He never did. I tried talking to the team. They knew something was off. Everyone did. But no one wanted to say it out loud. No one wanted to be next. Still, I held on. I kept working, kept trying, kept believing that decent people win if they just stay decent long enough. But then the meeting started. Tom loved phrasing things as concerns. "Ethan, I'm concerned about your productivity. Ethan, I'm concerned about your communication style. Ethan, I'm concerned the team feels unsupported by your recent performance." The team, of course, had said none of that. I went to HR the first time after he wrote me up for missing a deadline he'd changed without telling me. They nodded sympathetically, promised to look into it, and did absolutely nothing. The second time, they suggested maybe I misinterpreted his tone. The third time, they subtly hinted I might be the problem. The fourth time, they stopped replying to my emails entirely. So yeah, sitting in that hearing, listening to Tom recite false accusations like baseball stats, none of it was new. What was new was the part of me that finally snapped into alignment, like my brain had been trying to load a corrupted file for months and suddenly found a clean version. Their version of events didn't matter. Mine did. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal archive, the one I'd been building quietly over the months when the red flags stopped looking like warnings and started looking like patterns. Emails, screenshots, timestamp messages, calendar edits, Teams logs, Slack exports, even the audio file from the day Tom told me, "If you want to stay here, learn when to shut up." He didn't know my phone automatically saves meeting audio when recording notes. All of it, every piece. I scrolled through the evidence, and with every page, the feeling inside me grew steadier. Not vindictive, not vengeful, just sure. Tom had spent a year rewriting my career into something unrecognizable. Now I had the original script. As I organized files into a single folder, something clicked in me. Not anger, not triumph, but clarity. That was my mini catharsis. The moment I realized I'd been treating survival like loyalty. I'd been trying to salvage a place that had already decided I didn't belong. It wasn't my job to save them from the truth. It was their turn to face it. I sent one email, not to HR, not to Tom, to compliance, the department nobody remembers exists until they're on the wrong side of it. A simple subject line: formal documentation request and reporting of managerial misconduct. I didn't add emotion, I didn't add drama, just facts. Clean, sharp, undeniable. And then silence, the kind you don't recognize at first, the kind that means something's gone wrong for someone else. I went to work as usual. I drank my coffee. I answered tickets. I didn't mention the hearing. I didn't mention the email. But Tom watched me the entire time. He sensed something. Bullies always do when their target stops shrinking. Around lunchtime, he approached my desk. "You seem unusually calm today," he said. I shrugged. "Just tired." His smile twitched. For the first time since he became my manager, he didn't look certain. And he was right to be nervous. Because what neither he nor HR nor his smirking attorney knew was that by the time they laughed in that hearing room, I was no longer the one on trial. They were, and the cost of that ignorance was coming. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. 2 days after I sent the report to compliance, the atmosphere in the office shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could point to, but like the air pressure had dropped by a few degrees. Doors stayed closed a little longer. HR walked faster than usual. Tom kept checking his phone between meetings, his jaw tightening every time the screen lit up. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. By Wednesday morning, I received an email marked urgent, mandatory attendance. Subject: final review meeting, compliance and HR location, conference room 4C. The same room where Tom had humiliated dozens before me. I sat down at my desk, reread the email once, then twice. I expected fear to hit me, maybe panic, but instead there was a calm hum beneath my ribs, the kind you feel at the crest of a roller coaster, just before gravity makes its move. At 10:02, the door to 4C swung open. Tom entered first, trying to look unfazed, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. HR followed, carrying a folder thick enough to hurt someone, and then a man I'd never seen before walked in behind them. Gray suit, metal pen, calm eyes, the kind of calm that doesn't come from kindness, but from authority. Compliance. Tom didn't hide his irritation. "Is he really necessary?" he asked HR, nodding toward the man. The compliance officer sat down, opened a laptop, and didn't even look at him. "We're recording this meeting. Please wait until we begin." Tom blinked. HR swallowed. I sat down across from them, hands steady. For the first time, they weren't running the room. HR started with the standard spiel, voice trembling slightly as she read the procedure. But before she could get halfway through, the compliance officer lifted a hand. "Stop!" She froze. He turned to me. "Ethan, I've reviewed all documents you submitted. Before we proceed, I need clarification on a few points. You're welcome to speak freely." I glanced briefly at Tom. His face went strangely blank, the way a gambler looks when he realizes the deck has changed mid-game. The officer tapped a key and the large screen on the wall lit up. Email threads, Slack messages, calendar edits, file logs, everything. He scrolled slowly, deliberately, letting each piece of evidence breathe in the fluorescent air. "Mr. Saunders," he said, turning to Tom with clinical calm, "can you explain why deadlines for this employee were repeatedly altered without documentation?" Tom shifted in his seat. "There must be a mistake in—" "Please don't lie," the officer cut in, not raising his voice. It hit harder than shouting. Then he clicked another file, the audio recording. Tom's voice filled the room. "If you want to stay here, learn when to shut up." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the dangerous kind. HR's mouth fell open. Tom's lawyer wasn't present this time, and his absence was deafening. I didn't look away, not once. The compliance officer folded his hands. "This alone is grounds for termination. Combined with the pattern of retaliation and falsification of performance concerns," he looked at HR. "You allowed this to continue after 4 documented complaints?" HR went pale. Tom tried to recover. "This is being taken out of context." "It's not," the officer said simply. Another file opened. A spreadsheet. Every discrepancy. Every missing document. Every manipulated ticket. He clicked through the data like he was reading a grocery list. And then he said the sentence that flipped the entire balance of power. "Mr. Saunders, step out of the room." Tom stared at him. "Excuse me?" "We need to speak with the employee alone. You may wait in the hallway." Tom didn't move. Maybe he couldn't. The officer didn't repeat himself. He simply held the stare until Tom broke eye contact and walked out. The door closed, and in the quiet that followed, I felt it. That shift, that tilt in the world, the moment when the hunted becomes the witness. The officer turned to me. "You've been remarkably patient," he said. "Most employees would have quit months ago." "I tried," I replied. "HR said they'd handle it." "They didn't," he answered. HR flinched. He continued, "There will be consequences. For him. For this department. Potentially for the external attorney involved if misconduct is confirmed." For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. Then came the part I didn't expect. "Before we conclude, Ethan, we need to ask whether you intend to pursue legal action. If so, the company is prepared to negotiate. If not, we'd like to offer reinstatement with reassignment, compensation for damages, and the option to remain under direct HR protection until the transition is complete." I sat still, absorbing it. Not victory, not vindication, just release. It was the mini catharsis I never saw coming, the quiet realization that I was done being the victim in their narrative. The officer nodded. "We'll handle the rest. You don't need to confront him again." But I knew we weren't finished. Not yet. Because whatever was happening behind that closed door in the hallway, that was the sound of Tom's world beginning to collapse. And I hadn't said a single word to make it happen. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. By the time I stepped out of conference room 4C, the hallway felt different, quieter, heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. Tom was nowhere in sight. HR lingered at the end of the corridor, pretending to scroll through her phone, though her hands shook just enough to betray her. I didn't stop to talk to anyone. I didn't need to. The machine had already started moving, and I was no longer the one in front of its wheels. That afternoon, I was called to the 11th floor, a floor I'd only ever seen during fire drills. Executive offices, glass walls, polished floors, the whole world looking just a little too expensive. A woman from legal met me at the door, shook my hand, and guided me into a room with soft lighting and a table that probably cost more than my first car. She spoke calmly, professionally. The company acknowledged its failure to protect me. They acknowledged the retaliation. They acknowledged the documented misconduct. And then came the offer, not cheap, not symbolic, but real. Compensation. reassignment to a different department with a salary bump, a written apology, clean records across every internal system, a guarantee that future references would be handled by a director, not HR. I listened quietly, hands folded. She waited for anger. She waited for some dramatic speech. But that wasn't who I was anymore. "I'm not here to burn the company down," I finally said. She nodded. "Good, because we'd rather rebuild trust than settle lawsuits." I signed the agreement with the same steady, unshaking hand I'd used in that first hearing. Only this time the signature didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of breathing again. 2 days later, the email went out. Effective immediately, Thomas Saunders is no longer employed by the company. HR will undergo restructuring and compliance retraining. External legal partners are being reviewed, pending breach of conduct findings. No details, no drama. Just clean corporate consequences. But in an office like ours, silence is its own broadcast. People talk, people notice. When I walked in the next morning, my old team didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with respect. Some nodded, some smiled. One quietly clapped as I passed by. I didn't need applause, but it was nice. A new manager introduced himself. Calm voice, steady eyes, no ego behind the handshake. "We're glad to have you," he said. Real words, not corporate filler. For the first time in a long time, I believed someone meant it. The strange thing about finally getting peace is that it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, softly, like a room where the noise has finally stopped. I started waking up without the weight in my chest. Coffee tasted like coffee again, not fuel. I went on longer walks. I slept through the night. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head, trying to figure out what I could have done differently. Because the truth was simple. I hadn't been the problem, and I never was. One evening, about a week after everything ended, I drove home with the windows down. The air was cool, the sky turning that deep blue that makes streetlights glow warmer. My phone stayed silent in the glove compartment. No threats, no warnings, no late-night anxieties disguised as policy reminders. Just silence. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked up to my door. For the first time, unlocking it felt like entering my own life again, not the ruins of someone else's control. The house smelled like fresh laundry. My computer screen glowed softly in the corner of the living room, and for a moment I stood still, letting the quiet settle into me. Not excitement, not triumph, just peace. A kind of peace that doesn't ask for anything, a kind of peace that doesn't need permission. People think satisfaction comes from revenge. It doesn't. It comes from clarity, from drawing a line and finally stepping onto the right side of it. Tom thought he'd written the ending of my story. HR thought they'd locked the door behind me. That lawyer thought his smirk was the last thing I'd remember. They were all wrong. The only thing I remember is the moment I decided to stop surviving them and started choosing myself. Now I show up to work without dread. I work with people who respect me. And every night I go home knowing the truth they tried so hard to bury. I didn't lose anything. They did. And me? I'm finally living a life where no one gets to decide my worth in a conference room. Not anymore.